Hello. Welcome. Hello. I don't know if that worked there. Welcome to my first live stream. I'm declaring ignorance. I have no idea what I'm doing with the live stream. I decided to use it because I'm running out of space. It's a long story on my computer. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Terry. I'm also known as Snowdrops Sunsets. And this video today is explaining understanding trauma and how it affects us, looking at it in a holistic way and trying to explain a brief introduction of some of my understandings of trauma. I suppose I should start a little bit personal. The reason I would like to share this information is because I've had to overcome a series of traumas in my life. Traumas, physical traumas such as serious car accidents and things that I had, but also sexual trauma and other violations that I've had to understand and go through, such as being burgled and being made homeless. And this is all caused me to really try and seek and understand trauma, what it is, how it was affecting me, why it was having such an impact in my life. And it's been a long journey. It's been a very long journey for me. And now I'm at a point where I feel like I understand it a lot, actually. I understand it a lot. Sorry, downplaying myself there. I feel like I have a really good understanding of trauma because I was kind of forced in a way to be able to understand it and deal with it myself. I was struggling to find the support I would have liked through traditional treatment avenues. I have tried them and they just didn't work. They weren't helping. In fact, there was a period where I was, dealing with doctors, and I did drug therapy, we'll call it, on a lot of medications, and just the effects of the medications had extra ripple effects that were causing more issues in my life and making it even more complex. So I made a decision about 10 years ago. I had a very significant moment in my life. I was living in South London and I was a photographer at the time. I had my own studio. On the surface, things seemed to be going great, and outsider looking in would have thought I was in a really good place. I had worked really hard to get to that point and my career was starting to take off. I'd just come back from an invitation to work in the Philippines and I met some amazing people. And basically what happened when I was there is it was the beginning of an amazing opportunity for me. It was an amazing offer and it created a big shift. And I went over there and I lived and worked there for several months. I'll maybe share the story in more detail down the line, but effectively what happened through that is I was really struggling there. I was in a beautiful place. I was working in a, really well facilitated production company, like I said, with some really great people from all around the world. And I wasn't happy. I spent most of the time complaining and I was so angry. There'd been some deception involved to get me there. And then when I got there, things weren't quite as they seemed. And in amongst it, it was the first time I'd been to a third world country, a developing country. And I met these amazing Filipino people and who lived, in these small groups in shanty, tin huts, all families packed in together. They had nothing, real poverty. They had hardly any belongings and, they heavily relied on each other. But you know what? I met these people and joy of their life was just pouring out of their hearts. They were so filled with smiles and hugs, and every moment they just seemed to really enjoy, even when things were tough, they just seemed to pull together. And I thought, Oh my God. When I come back to London, South London after the Philippines was a big, I can tell you. And when I come back from London, I just thought, how can these people be so happy and they've got nothing? And look what I have in comparison. I was making quite a decent amount of money. I had, I had a photography studio. I had a lot of equipment. I had support from, friends and family to get where I was. And I thought, how can they be so happy? And I wasn't. But anyway, coming back into that space, it led to a series of events that just changed my life forever. I lost everything in the space of about 6 months. My photography studio was burgled several times, and I had to try and rebuild everything I had. I was raped by a friend. I can't talk about that too much now, but I will on another video. I was suicidal. I decided at that point I was at so low, and I'd been through so much before that, but this was just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was around the times of there was riots happening in Peckham. It was when Mark Duggan was shot, and there was three or 4 days of real unrest right on my doorstep. Fires, people marching down the streets, smashing things up. There was all this stuff was going on. I can't even put it necessarily in a really straight timeline because of what I understand now. I was just completely trapped in trauma brain, and that was it. I gave up. I said, you know what? Pray to God, who I hadn't spoken to for a very long time. And I said, if this is life, I am done. I was like, okay, this is not worth living. And I took my own life. I swallowed every single pill I had in the house, which was quite a lot at the time, paracetamol, ibuprofens, all the antidepressants and things I was on, and washed it down with alcohol. I had plenty of that in the house, and passed out for several days and woke up, much to my dismay at the time. Reason I'm sharing that is because once I woke up, that was a decisive point for me. It really did change everything. I was a different person when I came back. Like, I had made that choice. I had asked God for help, and then I was, alive again. And I had to give in, and I just gave in to the process because I knew I couldn't manage my life anymore, and everything drastically changed for me. It was not the end of bad times. I went through a lot more things after that. But it was the start of me becoming conscious of my own life. And it was the start of me seeking something better, seeking healing. I decided I didn't want to live like that, and I wanted to get better. So since then, that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, I have been on quite a journey. And that journey has involved mind, body, and spirit. And I feel like now I really quite understand the process of what happened for me. I've got an idea of what helped and what didn't help. And I really understand how the trauma affected us. And I know what has been good for me to get me out of that situation. So I really just wanted to share that. It'll take a lot of time, but I really wanted to do this first video just to try and share some, it's not basic, it's very complex, but just to try as best I can and explain how I understand trauma. And I've got a couple little images and things to try and visualize it. And yeah, let's go. Okay, so first point for me is just to define it. I think for me trauma is an uninvited, shocking event. It's something that takes us out of what I now call our baseline flow. So before, I was kind of unconsciously just going along life. I kind of think of it as a river, I have an image to show you in a minute. But yeah, I was going along. Sometimes I was affecting change and making things happen, but mostly it was, going along, and I had a pretty standard of emotions. I was doing, I had a lot of strategies to try and hide them emotions and cope with them, because I was totally unaware of that aspect of my life. And what I call our baseline, kind of imagine it a bit like a river. And then what trauma is, it's like it's a crisis point. I think we get to a point where our mind, body, and spirit is like, no, you can't deal with this anymore. And traumatic events will start happening to us, for us, to try and wake up, that's why people talk about waking up and awakening experiences. And they're generally traumatic events that put you in a crisis point that effectively try and force a change. For me, I understand that now. It's a natural part of our evolution. It's how we evolve as humans. I'll do a whole other video on evolution. But to evolve to the next level of consciousness, awareness, spirituality, our mental understanding, our physical strength, is a crisis point for evolution. Now, when trauma happens, it is designed, or the point of it is, it's going to affect all of us. It affects our mind, it affects our body, and it affects our spirit. I generally talk about things a lot in threes, because as I now understand, a lot of the universe and energies is built up on threes. It's another video, but now, in order to heal from trauma, it needs to be fully integrated into our system, and it needs to be integrated holistically. Now, I'm going to show you an image, which these are very rudimentary drawings. Maybe it's make them better and do another video in the future. But for now, hopefully just so you get the idea. You've probably seen this symbol before. Let me see. It's backwards on the camera. But this is, it's like the medical, I can't remember what you call it now. It's the sign of the medicine symbol. And this bit here, if you look at it, looks very similar to a DNA strand. And that's exactly what it is. And for me, what this represents is the healing process. And we've been very aware of this for a long, long time. When we get to the top here, we have wings and we can fly. This is actualization. This is when we have fully integrated our trauma or ourselves to our pinnacle point, and we're free. Okay. Now, trauma affects mind, body, and spirit, and it affects it in different ways, which I'll try and explore. But that's what these represent to me. On this side, I've explained that it affects our physical body, our mind, our spirit, and therefore our expression in the world. And that means in order to integrate, we need to look at self, we need to look at others, we need to look at our relationship between ourselves and others, and then how we create in the world and consciously create. Now, trauma might affect our bodies in very different ways, obviously depending upon the trauma. There may be some physical injuries. Obviously, say if you're in a car accident and you might have cuts, bruises, broken bones, whatever. That's a physical injury that needs to be treated. There's also the physical aspect that affects our nervous system. And this is where PTSD comes in, which is a little bit complex because I'm not sure why that's completely defined as a mental health problem. Maybe it's again another video. But the PTSD aspect of it, it's the nervous system response. So it's a physical response your body creates to the trauma. And that also needs physical healing. In the mind category, what our mind does when trauma happens is it needs to have a strategy. Like our entire psyche is made up of strategies, and we take in patterns, we take in information, and we come up with our own strategy as to how we can survive in the world and how we cope with life, how we project ourselves. All of that goes on in the mind and the psyche. So when you have a trauma, our mind wants to create a strategy. and it needs to figure out a way to try and stay safe so the trauma doesn't happen again. That's what our mind's trying to do. And it'll create pathways and responses that will be triggered to try and prevent any repeat of this crisis and this trauma. And I think that's kind of where the PTSD diagnosis comes from. That, I don't want to go too off on that, but it creates a new pathway, but it links to our nervous system. So actually, I don't want to go too off on that, but it's a new, it creates a new pathway, but it links to our nervous system. So actually, all of this, but for PTSD, it's both a physical and a mental thing. Well, all of this, but for PTSD, it's both a physical and a mental thing. But these patterns can be created unconsciously from our trauma, can be very negative and very detrimental to us. So that's why a lot of causing anxiety, depression, as I mentioned, PTSD, this mental health categorization, to be honest, I think it's just strategies for coping or avoiding trauma. Unconscious strategies for avoiding and coping trauma. Now, on a spiritual aspect, what happens to us spiritually when we have trauma? Our spirit, our soul needs to understand what happened in relation to our life. It needs to be able to put it into our life story in a way that makes sense and still allows us to be ourselves and to have meaning, purpose in the world. And obviously that gets very complex, especially if you're then stuck in mental health, a space of restricted mental health, or you're dealing with the physical body responses of trauma. So that was this. Mind, body, and spirit. There's importance with these different colours I've used, which I'm trying to explain a bit later, which is a little bit more complex. These colours will be explained a little bit further on in another drawing. Also, an energy to do with trauma, know it and feel it. That's what we call a trigger. Because it's so significant of that event and all the built-up emotion, energy will flow through us when we're talking about trauma. The trauma, because our mind wants to create a stability. Actually, think that this has to happen. Cycle of body, mind, spirit, world, and that is. It's a harsh reality, but it's true. The sooner we can be aware of our trauma, the sooner we can understand this pattern and this balance of life. This here is our baseline that most people are conscious, and this is kind of like the depth of our emotions. You don't go too up, and it's fine. So it's over the edge. And if anyone knows also the water that pulls you down, not of a waterfall, the water, it might look still, but like this trauma, and you're not trying to get out, you're going to get sucked in around and around and around by your mind. So continually you'll be attracting more and more trauma without realizing it. This is not putting blame anybody or anything like that, but it's just what happens. We create and try and become aware of it. 2, we're trying to, the longer you will, the opposite to that, by the way, which if you integrate this and learn, you can really insistence, you can choose to live in a blessing cycle in this, but so you can visualize illustration I could come up with. And it's very hard to illustrate them in this flat way, but it's the best I could do for now. Springing childhood, when you're stuck in a trauma cycle, not always those triggers. Aware of the initial trauma and understanding it, or whether you've been raped or abused. We perceive, at least intentionally, to cause us harm, safe in the world. You know, you can, even something like a car accident at all. Why would anybody, or my psyche, or how I was living? Now, this part of the middle is my consciousness, or me, or you, like the stream, these different parts. Yeah, we've all got, you know, this might be part, this might be my work part. And then what happened with, when I went through the event, and split, I've put into the simple categories I can, because you can split in many parts. For me, what it meant was, it took a while to realize it's almost like watching a TV, and aspects of my life, but they weren't aware of each other. So the good side of me, and this is a lot work and all this, it's like you're conscious and you're unconscious. And we're only really conscious of our good parts. Now, we still witness them, but it's not chatting to your good part. So you're not actively conscious of that behavior or what you're doing. This is kind of what all these parts kind of start trying to understand what is happening. It's tried, and it's going around all these different parts of your life and trying to figure out. And this can be quite manic and awful. This is like the constant triggers. This is, you know, when we're having really serious physical reactions, mental health reactions, because it's exploring all these parts never-endingly. You can't sleep. What I've realized through the process that I went through is I've now got to this, or something like this. Work me is work me, and friends me is friend me. So that this, rather than there being a split and not being aware of what's going on, and I have a strategy to cope with them, create them all into my life, create them all into my life, into the world. And that's what I would like to start sharing. Ways I've been able to do that, the really effective methods of healing, because everything's helped me has been natural healing. I've had to obviously work with people, how much you know, how much you can. And then I want to try and reassure people, integrate all this. You can experience like everything life has to offer. You can choose to, and you can choose to go back up there if you want. You can be. That's something else to say actually as well. If somebody is stuck down here in a trauma cycle, you really focus on down.